Thank you, Professor. And thank you, Shanthie, Professor Rais, and Professor Udagama. It's three interesting set of presentations on three different aspects. Shanthie focused more on aid and what kind of government legitimacy that would have. Professor Rais focused on whether this could have been totally avoided. He looked into Taliban, the growth, and then the future. Professor Udagama talked more on the legal issues, especially the humanitarian issues, and in particular reference to women. What I'll do, I'll mix all these three interventions, and then also try to present. We have looked back. Now let us try to look ahead. Where would Afghanistan go in the next 10 years based on whatever they have, or the three intervention that we had from Shanthie to Professor Deepika. I have kind of made a quick biryani with four questions, based on whatever these three great intervention. I sincerely wish we had given them more time, but then in a panel discussion, this is all we could get. Four questions. First question: will the international community continue to be interested in Afghanistan as we see a new government? I think this is going to be a crucial question that we all have to understand. While it is important to criticize and critique what has happened in the last 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, let's look ahead as well. Now, this is where what Shanthie said, her point on international aid. This is going to be a crucial point for Afghanistan. Will international community continue to give aid to Afghanistan? This is what Professor Udagama was also talking about. On what conditions? She was talking about carrot and stick. It's based on the belief that Taliban is willing to take the carrot or listen to the stick. What if neither carrot nor stick is going to work? Or the larger question: what if there is no international aid coming into Afghanistan in a manner that we would want it to? Yeah. My worry here is more than the aid. This is where I would want all three of you to respond when you have. What would be the global interest in Afghanistan? Forget about the aid. Is the international community looking at Afghanistan? Is there an interest going to be developed in Afghanistan to have aid coming? My fear is, if you look back in the last 5 years, especially from the Tokyo conference to the Paris conference, there is a fatigue. I think, we are blaming Biden for getting out. I think that international community mentally got out of Afghanistan a couple of years ago. I am not convinced that the international community is going to come back to Afghanistan now in one way or the other. So this lack of interest or focus of interest elsewhere is going to be crucial for Afghanistan as it moves ahead. That's the first point. The second point, as a part of this, is what would be the US interest? Will US come back? There are a few of us have been writing whether the US will come back, or even there was a discussion on what condition the US will come back. I think Biden has made it categorical. US is not going to come back to Afghanistan. I think he is looking at China. He is looking at the larger global interest. He sees Afghanistan as a liability. He wants to get out of Afghanistan, leaving whatever it is to rest of the region to deal with. US is not likely to come back to Afghanistan the way it did in 2001. Even if it is, it will be very notional. This all the more would impact on the larger aid that would come to Afghanistan. So this is the second point that I would like to look into in terms of international interest. The third point, I would refer to Professor Udagama's point on international communities' legal engagement. The concern for international law. From a realist perspective, maybe I would like to differ with her. There are multiple scenarios in Middle East, multiple countries in Middle East, Africa, and unfortunately, Afghanistan will also go into that. As long as our interests are there, we will be interested. As long as our interests are not there, we are not going to be interested at all. This is the harsh reality that many of the African countries, Latin American countries are facing. Afghanistan will also, unfortunately, go into that. So it's the international law, humanitarian concern, the larger strategic interest will subsume, unfortunately, these humanitarian concerns that we have. Maybe you and me will talk about this very passionately in a region, but we will just see what is going to happen in Afghanistan and let it happen that way. This is unfortunate, but that's my fear, that where Afghanistan would go in the next 10 years. The second question, if the international community's interest is going to be dented or less, will the immediate region pick up where the international community left? An interesting question. Maybe I would want to pose a question to both Shanthie and Professor Rais. Will the region pick up where the international community left? There is a sense that Pakistan, China, Russia, and Iran are having some kind of an understanding on Afghanistan. Will they be able to stand up and match what the international community has been doing until now? It is one thing having a larger footprint in Afghanistan, recognizing Taliban, helping them is another point. I am slightly worried. I liked what Professor Udagama said in this. She also brought the OIC into this. What would be OIC's role? She talked about economic, political, and I think she's also hinting at the sectarian harmony, that whether OIC can bring some kind of a harmony to the Afghan and kind of dent the Taliban's extreme. This is a question, interesting question that we may want to ask. Would OIC do it? Has it done it in the past anywhere else? Then in that, if the answer is no, then there is no guarantee that OIC would be interested in bringing them some kind of a social engineering or a political engineering in Afghanistan. So that's a second question. Will the immediate region pick up economically, politically? My fear is we are going to look at our own footprint in Afghanistan having to have a larger presence than support Afghanistan. Afghans, maybe we may want to support the government, we may not end up supporting the people. That's my fear. That's my second question. The third question, based on the three presentation, will the Taliban be able to govern Afghanistan? A larger question would be, will it be able to consolidate the gains of the last 20 years, or it's going to pick up from where it left on 9th September 2001, ignoring whatever has happened in the last 20 years? It is one thing to criticize the Americans. It's one thing to criticize the international community. Has something good gone into Afghanistan in the last 20 years? I think this is a larger question that we have to ask. And where will Taliban start? Will they pick up from where? The legitimacy question that Shanthie and Professor Rais talked about. Will Taliban be able to gain legitimacy? It's a very interesting question. Professor Rais also talked about another legitimacy in terms of international recognition. Yeah, much would depend on these two issues. This is where I think maybe the legitimacy would come more from the region, the immediate region for Taliban, than from inside or from outside the region. That's how I see it. In terms of, I said that the last 20 years, something good that happened. There's a whole lot of new generation that has come up in the last 20 years. I have taught a few Afghans. I have listened to them. This is a new generation, different from the generation that I may have interacted as a scholar in my university days from the 90s. Especially women. So there is so much that this generation has come. I would even don my political science hat and say there's a new Afghan identity that was emerging across the ethnic identity, the Pashtun, the Tajik, the Hazara, the sectarian identity. There was a larger Afghan identity emerging. I can vouch for it. There was a larger Afghan sentiment. I am an Afghan first. My ethnic identity may be secondary or tertiary to me. This identity, will it sustain? Will Taliban be able to sustain this identity, the larger Afghan identity? The role of women, Professor Deepika talked about this role of women. Amazing work has gone into the last 20 years. This is where we will see, unfortunately, Taliban may say something, may do something else, even if there are nominal statements. This would be back to that's what I fear. It would be back to 2001. Many think that Taliban is reformed. Its supporters may want to tell us, but I have no faith in on this aspect. There are a few elements, they won't change their colors. Taliban won't change. The last point on this is Shanthie talked about the mismatch between the US and the Afghan government. It was a very interesting point. She was looking at in terms of, if I got it right, that Afghan government wanted something, whereas US didn't yield to it. The opposite is also true. The US and also the international community wanted a much more liberal, democratic, non-corrupt, non-governing Afghanistan. I don't think that's what the Afghan government also gave. So there was a mismatch from both sides. Let's keep that in mind. The last point, last question, this is the fourth question, and I'll stop here. Now, we talked about these three. We were very critical. So we are discussing this on 9th September 2021. So is it a doomsday scenario for Afghanistan? Is it this case? This is where I would want to go back to what Prof.Rasul talked about. We have seen this before. I think he caught it brilliantly. We have seen this before. Let me put it across. The last 20 years, you saw a democratic government supported by the US. Before that, 5 years, you saw a Taliban government supported by Pakistan. Before that, you saw a Mujahideen government. Before that, you saw an Afghan government supported by Soviet Union. Before that, you saw Zair, the king, the monarch, and then overthrow. So if I have to take today's date and go back 10 years, today is what, 9th September, you have Taliban in power. Yeah. Who was in power on 9 September 2011? We had Karzai. So who was in 9 September 2001? Taliban. 9 September 1991, Najibullah. 9 September 1981, 9 September 1961. If you go back, every 10 years you have seen a change, a new government, a new leadership. So what would be on to 2031? We don't know. So let's not think about a doomsday scenario here and then think things won't change. This is a phase. I liked what Professor Rais said. We have seen this before. We will see it again. I rest my case there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Suba Chandran. You raised not 4 questions, number of questions. Very interesting. And that would provide very good foundation, the basis for the discussion. Now I give the floor to Professor Rais in order to make your comments to the points raised by Professor Suba Chandran. Your observations.
Yeah, I really appreciate the profound insights Professor Suba Chandran has shared with us. I don't have any disagreement with him. And actually, by raising these questions, he has sharpened the focus of our conversation for this webinar. I would like to try to answer one question, or maybe 2. One is that, these are very pertinent questions. I wish I had an answer. We can debate, probably read some kind of, if not clear, some vague understanding which way Afghanistan is going to go. Actually, this is the concern of diplomats, this is the concerns of geopolitical experts, and this is the concern of intellectuals, which way Afghanistan is likely to go. We really don't know. Now, I believe that on the question of this effort, that can we create a regional consensus? And in this regional consensus are the countries that territorially border on Afghanistan. So China, we have discovered, has about 8 kilometers of common border with Afghanistan. Russia has been very involved parties, Iran, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. What is the objective of all this? I don't think the objective is not to replace and continue the projects or sustain Afghanistan the way it was sustained. United States alone was spending $4 billion plus to help the government pay its employees and maintain the armed forces. Where is that money going to come from? So the effort is that can they recognize together? Even in the present situation, Pakistan is not taking the first step as it did along with Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates in 1996, and hurriedly recognized Afghanistan. So I believe that Pakistan we have been warned by our Western allies and friends and some regionals too, that be careful and see which way things go. So the effort is that can we develop a regional consensus on recognition, on some kind of legitimacy. We are pinning our hope about some moderation of Taliban. I think that is the best that can give an opportunity to friends of Taliban and Afghanistan within the region. And we will see whether the government is inclusive. When it comes, it is an interim government. We will see whether the schools for girls remain open, whether women come back to work, and whether, as they have committed, so far I don't think they have violated their pledge, that they will not take any revenge against those who fought against them or who worked with the foreign forces or who worked with the former government. Rather, they are inviting Afghan nationals who have left the country to come back and rebuild. So much depends on the attitudes of the Taliban. If things go worse, the worst case scenario might be that Afghanistan joins the League of Authoritarian States and get closer to them. But if it joins those states, and it will have to go under the patronage of perhaps Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan to some extent. So what kind of Afghanistan that will be? And I think maintaining stability and order will require much more than that. And that is a comprehensive, total, across the board engagement with the international community. Afghanistan, when the Soviet Union invaded, was a country of about 15 million people. Today it is a country of about 40 million. How the population has exploded during past 40 years. It has really multiplied, and the expectations of the populations. And so I wish I could answer all the questions, but I would like to stop here. I am.
Thank you.
I wish I were optimistic.
Oh, right.
I try to be optimistic. I was happy that war has ended. I am happy that war and terror is over. I'm happy that American war machine is gone. The NATO is gone. But this I see as an opportunity, but still I remain not really optimistic. So I'm really concerned as a student of Afghanistan, as a friend of Afghans, as a neighbor of Afghanistan, because whatever way Afghanistan go, Pakistan, my country, my people will be affected.
Right. Thank you, Professor Rais. And Nilum, Professor Udagama. Hello, Professor Nilum Udagama.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
now,
thank you very much.
Yeah, you can respond to the questions.
Okay.
As much as possible, you can limit within 3 minutes. So
Okay, I'm sure I can.
Yeah.
Well, those are very interesting insights, and Professor Suba Chandran. I think most of the questions that he raised are best left to the other distinguished panelists, because they really relate to geopolitics and so on. But suffice it to say that this observation that Afghanistan has seen such rapid changes, and we'll see it again, and so on. You just look at it from a human perspective. I mean, these people in Afghanistan have paid a huge price for the fact that great powers find the country so attractive for geopolitical reasons. So this is going to, I think, dictate what's going to come as well. So in terms of whether the international community will remain engaged with Afghanistan, it seems to me will be about wanting stability in the region. For some, it might be about limiting the influence of China and Russia in the region, but that I leave to those who are qualified to talk about it. In terms of international law mechanisms and human rights mechanisms, it seems to me that the interest will continue, because it seems to me it's a question of international civil society taking this matter up. And there's a very sophisticated Afghani diaspora out there, and many who left the country earlier and under these circumstances in August are the articulate, educated, liberal Afghanis. They want to see change in their country. They want to see Afghanis taking, claiming their country back. I don't think they're rooting for any international intervention in the sense of direct military intervention and so on. So I think there will be that interest. Certainly in terms of economic packages, I don't know whether North America would be interested, whether the United States would be interested. We are still trying to figure out why the United States left the way it did. I was hoping that that would be, the subject of analysis. But I think the European Union and, and certainly hopefully SAARC would be interested to see stability in the region, and certainly human rights issues would continue to be taken up. So it all depends on how the international civil society functions, and I think there is that interest. And certainly would Taliban be successful? Well, we don't know, we'll have to wait and see, but I think that the language of change, the language of representative government in the long run, that Afghanis have to be in charge of their own affairs. If that is the case, the aspirations of the Afghani people have to be taken into consideration very seriously. Taliban is only one group. They may be, claiming to be very powerful at the moment. All those factors, come into mind as I respond. But I too, defer to the views of the experts on, the geopolitics and so on, because this is such a game, unfortunately, for the people of Afghanistan. They just can't rest until stability arrives in their country. And we've got to support them in whatever way we can for them to find that stability and peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deepika. Now floor is yours, Professor Lajvanti.
Thank you very much, Professor Keerawella, for this opportunity. And I must thank the three panelists for their wonderful talks, as well as Professor Suba Chandran for his comments. I'm going to be rather brief, although I have a lot, but I'm going to be rather brief. And I must say that what I intend to say is comes from a perspective of political theory, because that's where my academic interests lie. So just some quick points that I have is that I think the way we have been reading Afghanistan since Taliban rather America has receded, Taliban has taken the country over politically. I think there is a contradiction, or there is an internal incoherence in the way we are reading Afghanistan. On one hand, the withdrawal of America without the successful implant of democracy in Afghanistan, which it promised to. Although now it says, because if one were to go by the State of the Union addresses when America went into Afghanistan, was clearly there was an attempt to export democracy. This was done in Iraq, this is done in Afghanistan. And I think the fact that America has left without this possibility of a democratic Afghanistan actually shows the whole futility of the global export of democracy, or the export of global democracy. So that is one part of the story. It's also interesting that unlike colonialism, where we saw in some states, in some societies, a kind of civil, anti-colonial national movement emerging in India, in South Africa, in Tunisia, in Algeria, we haven't seen that kind of democratic space emerging in Afghanistan in 20 years of America's presence in Afghanistan. And this speaks volumes on America's presence. That we can talk about infrastructure and dams and roads and universities, but the public space, in my opinion, is not created, because once the Americans leave, there is no democratic leader, there is no people's representative over there. So America goes, Taliban comes. This, I think, is one part of the internal contestation, that democracy cannot be exported anywhere. And I think international relations studies should take cognizance of this. But on the second hand, I think when we are reading Afghanistan, we are reading Afghanistan today, 9 September 2021, on three considerations. One is that the Afghan people have fallen short of democracy. So they got 20 years of America's presence. They have not been able to transform into a democratic society. They have the Taliban on them. The second, I think, where we go back again to this, that we expect European Union or regional powers or America, will it come back? To come in, is, I think, also saying that the Afghan people are incapable of sovereign self-determination. And I think this is very problematic. I am obviously not collapsing Taliban with the people of Afghanistan. And that is the third point, that there seems to be a collapse, a collapse in the reading of the people of Afghanistan and the Taliban. I had something else in mind, but only if you give me the time, Professor Keerawella. I think what we also must put on the, I would not, because I think, this is good man, bad man. The good man in a democratic society, the good man is supposed to be inside and the bad man is supposed to be outside. But what has happened now with our reading of Afghanistan is the good men are all outside, hoping to protect Afghanistan people, while the bad men are inside Afghanistan. And I don't think we have a conceptual reading of this yet. And I just want to say one last point before I stop. I have a lot because I've been trying to understand what's happened. I think we also need to mention the fact that there is a political economy of war making. War is not just for the sake of branding enemies or revenge, but there is also a political economy underlying. There is a whole capital investment in war making. And I think, as Professor Rais said, there is Iraq, there is Syria, there is Yemen, there is now Afghanistan, and God knows where we are heading next. So there is a whole political economy underlying this. But I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity and for the space as well. Thank you.
Then I will turn to Professor Rasul Rais for final word.
Well, I don't have any final word.
Okay.
But I think that the questions that have been raised, particularly about border communities, human security, they are very troubling. And given this whole situation of center and periphery, the border communities have lived on the periphery, both in Afghanistan and Pakistan. In this part, as well as in many other developing countries, where state has not been able to establish its complete writ in all areas, we see weak presence of the state. So therefore, border communities have a political economy of their own. They have a power structure of their own, and mostly they happen to be tribalized, and such kind of communities compete in terms of the functions of the state with the national state, whether it is Latin America, Africa, or in South Asia, and particularly in Afghanistan and Central Asian states. So they are in the margins, and they're in the margins sometimes because of accommodation, sometimes because of conflict and tensions, and because sometimes in some areas I have seen because of benign neglect. And I think if state becomes that weak and completely absent in the border regions of Afghanistan, I see much opportunity for the narcotic trade and for the production of narcotics, because the communities have to sustain themselves, and particularly in that kind of political economy and culture, you don't bring in such norms of something illegal. What is illegal in the streets of California may not be illegal in the villages of Helmand. So, that's really a function of state, whether it is able to deliver and create a modern economy or not. Unless that is done, these communities will live by their own standards and values.
Thank you, Professor Rasul Rais. Professor Udagama, last word.
Thank you. Well, not very much to be said. All are very interesting interventions, but this one intervention which suggested that we sort of portray the Afghani people as lacking sovereignty and that they have to rely on outside interventions to decide their destiny. I don't think that is what anyone said here. What I was hearing was that the problem is that the Afghani people have not been left to decide their own destiny, wave after wave of international interventions. And now, whether we like it or not, I mean, I don't think anybody is a great fan of Taliban, but now that is the reality. That's why we are saying engage with the Taliban, so that, not to engage with the Taliban to consolidate its own power base, but to serve the people of Afghanistan and eventually pave the way for the Afghani people.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Udagama. Shanthie had a prior engagement. Yeah, Nilum, Professor Udagama, you finished your last word, and then you stuck there. Okay. Shanthie had.
Sorry, I lost you for a while. So I just want to just wrap up saying that is certainly not what we are saying. We it is because of the recognition right to self-determination of the the Afghani people. We are raising all these issues. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Nilum, Professor Udagama. Professor Shanthie had another assignment, therefore she had to leave. I am really thankful to you all, but formally I would invite to make vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. It's my utmost privilege to deliver a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, on behalf of the Regional Center for Strategic Studies, would like to extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all speakers and participants for accepting our invitation to grace this occasion by sharing with us your invaluable knowledge, findings, and opinions today. A big thank you to Professor Shanthie D'Souza for her efforts towards enlightening us with a vivid picture of Afghanistan, beginning from its situation prior to its capture by the Taliban and to its ongoing situation. I must mention our deep sense of appreciation to Professor Rasul Rais for his insightful explanation of the Taliban and how they have come to power, its implications to the region, and the role of international community in shaping the future of Afghanistan. Further, we are grateful to Professor Deepika Udagama for demonstrating an interesting weave of the current situation in Afghanistan from the perspective of public international law and human rights protection and the role of international community. I may like to express our sincere thanks to Professor Suba Chandran for giving an excellent coverage of all three presentations today and for laying a strong foundation to today's discussion. And I cannot thank enough to all of you who participated today and contributed for an active discussion session. Special thanks to His Excellency, the High Commissioner of Pakistan, and all the diplomatic officers who were present today. My sincere thanks to all GPAC South Asia members and RCSS members for their support at all times. An event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheel starts rolling weeks ago. It requires planning and a bird's eye for details. Hence, last but not the least, I would like to acknowledge our staff at RCSS who worked very hard to make this webinar a success. Thank you, everyone.